Again, a special thanks to Chairman Issa for taking an extended Q&A. One of my primary concerns about this morning is that we actually have 3 speeches and almost no audience interaction, and obviously that was not the case. And it's generally my feeling that when you have a convocation of this many smart people who are this steeped in a given policy area, it's often quite useful to have all of you asking the questions. That said, I know that the man behind me, House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, representative from Virginia's 7th District, has some things to talk about as well in terms of how the House has moved forward, and I will say this progressively in a different sense, on a number of the promises it made on transparency around legislative data. This is an area that I think has gone under the radar for much of the American people, and I think the infrastructure changes that have been made there over the long term will have bearing upon the American public's ability to understand what is being done on their behalf. Over time, the introduction of more legislative data in structured formats, of streaming video, of increased social interaction between members and their constituents has the potential to transform how we actually do representative democracy. So with that opening, I'll give you some opportunities to talk about what you're doing with legislative data, and then we'll talk a bit more afterwards.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And really very energized about the subject that you all are here to focus on, which is transparency. As Alex indicated, we have in the House made a real commitment once the majority was assumed in 2010 to be true to that word, to open up, if you will, all of the sort of warehouses of information, if you will, in Washington as far as Capitol Hill is concerned, and then try and promote that agenda throughout the buildings, the basements, and the deep reservoir of information that exists in this town. So far as Capitol Hill and the House is concerned, I hope most of you have been to what the website we call cosponsor.gov. It is exactly what our host just talked about. It is trying to embrace the interaction online between those who are elected and the people who elect them. And many times, those who are electing their officials are not.
We love when summer gets hot.
But the instant frizz, not so much. So I'm taking Pantene's 72-hour dare.
Beat humidity for a smooth 72 hours. Get Pantene Smooth with Moroccan argan oil in a Pro V system. Help block out humidity, keep frizz from forming. Go 72-hour smooth.
Ditch the frizz. I dare you.
Get Smooth from Pantene, the world's #1 hair care brand. Hair so healthy it shines.
You gotta love, you gotta love, you gotta love, love. You gotta love, you gotta love me. Yeah.
Answer the call of the grill with new Friskies grillers. Full of meaty tenders and crunchy bites.
Necessarily privy or have access to all of that goes on in a legislative body. And as we see more and more the interconnectivity that exists because of the online communities, the legislative bodies, rightfully so, should be in the midst of that. Because what we are doing in any given committee hearing, subcommittee hearing on the floor of the House or Senate has bearing on someone. Some of what we do has bearing on pretty much everybody. So we sort of look at this as accomplishing several things. To involve individuals in legislation, to make sure that the prism through which mainstream media looks at things is not necessarily the only avenue for the people of this country to receive their information. And that's what transparency can yield. And so in the House, we have come forward with standardization efforts for all the legislation, the U.S. Code, and look to, under the leadership of Chairman Issa and his team, to continue the effort at transparency and to invite constituents, people of this country, to be involved in the legislative process. And one of the real novel approaches, I believe, in terms of legislative bodies, not in terms of everyday Americans, is finally the connection with social media in a real way. And cosponsored.gov allows one to do that. As one continues to engage with people that he or she knows, with him or her can come the involvement on policy issues that occur here in Washington. So we're very, very excited about what it means for political engagement. But let me talk a little bit about what we think transparency can also do to help accomplish policy goals. Transparency, to me, means accountability. It means more eyeballs on the way that the government operates, on its spending patterns, are a good thing. Yes, there are some critics out there that one may not agree with, but a good thing to have a robust debate around how taxpayer dollars are used and how the power of government is being implemented. And that's what transparency can do as well. It can end up yielding, I think, a more efficient federal government. And I know much of what you all are about, whether you're in the government contracting world or whether you are here as a techie that wants to go in and take this information and improve upon it and offer it up for use for the public. I think that's what we're all about. Now, I like to hold this up, and I'm actually a ecumenical user here. I've got two. But these are nothing but platforms of information, right? And as we know, the minute that the government opens up the deep reservoir of information, all of you and others like you across the world come and bring your innovation to bear and take the government information and make it useful for people. Well, why doesn't that work for all of government? Well, it can. And I love to take the example of the weather information that has then translated itself into consumer-friendly, user-friendly applications on these devices. Same thing with flight, FAA information. Same thing. It's saved how many countless hours for how many millions of flyers in America to have Flight Tracker, FlightAware, because the government decided that we can share that information. And that ought to be our mantra. Because honestly, I am a true believer in thinking that not anywhere near close to all the wisdom of this country exists in this town. And we need to leverage the innovation that's out there to help us solve the problems that exist at the federal level. And I know that there is a lot of activity ongoing at the state and local level as well in terms of coding, in terms of trying to figure out what we do with all this data to help us solve problems that affect people in their everyday lives. So with that, Howard, I'm delighted to answer any questions. Alex.
Sure. So we have That was clever. So we have fairly limited time, but I wanted to ask a couple of things. First, just to get to the point of Chairman Issa's bill, is the Data Act going to move again, and how soon?
Yes, we do intend to move the Data Act again. As you know, we moved it last year. I think there's been some improvements in the bill. We are still awaiting the scoring of the bill, and we'll look to then, once that comes back, and then to schedule it accordingly.
Okay, thank you. And then the second one is maybe a larger one. What are the limits to transparency? Obviously, this summer has been full of headlines. People are quite concerned about government surveillance, about government use of their data. You talked about making government more social. Of course, the disclosures, all the data from those social networks is something that government is looking at, often to help in disaster recovery, but also in the context of surveillance for law enforcement uses. When you look at the role of Congress in terms of governing that and overseeing these things, what are the limits of transparency? What are the limits in terms of releasing the data that government has about us?
Look, I do not think that these things are mutually exclusive. I think that we can accomplish transparency, the use of big data, the correlative analysis that can be undertaken with these massive amounts of information now can occur, and do so in a way that values privacy and that upholds the civil liberties and the rights associated with personal information. Obviously, the private sector is engaged in this at every turn. different, private sector versus the duty that the public is owed by the government. And it makes it a little bit more difficult for sure. But I do think we can do that and strike that balance so we can have the benefit of this type of analysis while protecting personal privacy.
Okay, Representative, thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you online.
Thank you very much.